Sometimes there's something in the water that shouldn't be there, something that's watching you, but you can't tell what it is. One Friday night, my brother and I went to a lake no one ever visited, quiet and still, just for fishing. But as the sun went down, something rose from the water that was neither a fish nor an ordinary person. And in that moment, we realized that nothing at that lake, that night, was normal. There's this lake my brother and I used to fish at. We'd use live bait, usually crickets or worms, and we'd catch a ton of bluegill. It was a fun time. And some of those early memories are the reason I've been such an avid fisherman for most of my life. The lake wasn't very popular, despite being well stocked from what I remember. I think most locals just found it inconvenient. Hard to access unless you were willing to hike through the woods. My brother and I always were. The seclusion was actually one of my favorite things about it. It felt like we were sharing something private, something not everyone got to experience. Everyone knows the best lake fishing happens during low light, early morning or late evening. Most people wake up at the crack of dawn, but my brother and I developed a habit of going later in the day and staying into the night. It was our substitute for whatever most high school kids were doing on weekends, probably partying and whatnot. This was a Friday night. Everything was going according to plan. We reached the lake just as the sun began to set, and by the time we finished baiting our hooks, the sun was already dipping below the horizon. We were positioned at the edge of the lake, on a small rock formation that made a comfortable surface for us, and all our extra geared. We'd done this hundreds of times. But as we were fishing, something caught my eye on the far side of the lake. There was movement in the water. Judging by the ripples alone, I was surprised it had taken me so long to notice. I pointed it out to JJ, and the two of us strained our eyes in confusion, trying to figure out what was causing it. The lake was pretty large, and with the low visibility, it wasn't like we could see clearly across it. But then, as we watched the ripples, something happened that I never would have expected. Not in a million years, the dark mass began rising out of the water, and as it emerged, my assumption that it was a huge fish vanished instantly. It wasn't a fish. It was far too big and far too upright. There was really only one explanation. I think my brother and I realized it at the same time, because we both cursed at once. It was a person. Think about how strange that is. Not only was there someone in a secluded lake after sunset, but they had been fully submerged, and not just briefly. They must have been down there for a long time. Otherwise, we would have noticed them earlier. My heart started racing. I felt this overwhelming urge to leave. My brother didn't. Agreed. He said we had just gotten there, and that whoever was in the lake was too far away to affect us. He wasn't wrong. So we stayed. For the next few minutes, we just watched. The person swayed back and forth, slowly, rhythmically, almost hypnotically. Their movements weren't jerky or panicked. They were smooth, fluid, as if they were controlling the water, not moving through it. Our fishing poles lay forgotten beside us. All our attention was locked on that figure. Were they fishing? No, that was ridiculous. Fishing underwater. JJ suggested maybe they were night swimming. It sounded plausible, until I dipped my hand into the lake. The water was freezing. I recoiled instantly. You'd have to be incognito swim in water that cold. I snapped myself out of it and told my brother we should ignore them and keep fishing. But when I looked at him, I knew something was wrong, that he was completely motionless. His lips were slightly parted. His eyes were fixed on the lake. He wasn't even holding his fishing pole. I said his name again and again. Finally, he blinked, picked up his rod instinctively, apologized. We tried to resume fishing, but our attention wasn't really there. I kept expecting the person to do something. Get out of the water, notice us, anything. After a few minutes of mindless casting, JJ tapped my shoulder. Look. I turned just in time to see the person submerge again. They disappeared beneath the surface. I stared at the spot, waiting. Seconds passed, then a minute, then another. That's when I noticed JJ had his phone out. A stopwatch. As it passed 2 minutes, my stomach tightened. JJ suggested maybe the person was training. I almost laughed. An Olympic diver, in a freezing lake, in the middle of nowhere, after dark. The thought stopped being funny. I started packing our gear, told JJ we were leaving, but he stopped me. He wanted to see how long they could hold their breath. I agreed, but kept packing anyway. That urge to leave was back. Then, just before 3 minutes, ripples appeared again, much closer this time, only about a fifth of the way across the lake. That's when it hit me. They hadn't just held their breath for nearly 3 minutes. They'd been swimming. I raised my voice to JJ, didn't argue. We stood up to leave, but curiosity held us there. The person emerged again. This time, we saw them clearly. It was a woman. She had long brown hair, a dark green swimsuit. And one more thing, she was beautiful, around our age, maybe a year or 2 older. The fear melted, just a little. She smiled, said hi, playful, almost COY.as if she hadn't just done something impossible. She floated effortlessly, comfortable in the water. I couldn't speak. My brother asked what she was doing. She tilted her head back, said she was swimming. He asked if she was training. She smiled again, something like that. Then she moved closer and asked us if we wanted to join her. I finally spoke, asked if she was crazy, told her the water was freezing. She laughed, said we'd get used to it. JJ said no. Her smile faded. She pressed a finger to her lip, thinking. Something about her expression, the casual confidence, the cold look in her eyes, set off every alarm in my head. I grabbed JJ, told her we were leaving. That's when she screamed. Not just yelled, screamed, at the top of her lungs. No. We grabbed our gear and ran. She screamed after us, telling us to come back. Get in the water. Then she started shrieking. Not words, just sound. like someone being stabbed, that I could still hear her halfway back to the car. JJ called the police, told them everything. They wanted us to stay nearby. He refused. Hung up. That I would have done the same. That we avoided the lake for a while, but eventually went back. Only with our dad. That we never saw her again. Now, with time, I realize how horrifying it really was. She was probably mentally ill. That's the explanation I've settled on. My brother has other theories, but I don't buy them. Either way, I doubt anything that strange will ever happen to me again. Sometimes it's not the monster in the dark that stays with you. It's the unanswered question. The moment where logic fails and your instincts take over. Looking back, I understand why my mind needed an explanation. Calling it mental illness, calling it coincidence, anything to make it fit into the world I know. But part of me still wonders, because some things don't feel random, they feel intentional. Like the lake wasn't just a place, but a test. A quiet reminder that there are things in this world we're not meant to understand. And that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is listen to that voice in your head and walk away before the water starts calling you back.